tell us why. Break that down for us, because I know before we got on, we kind of were talking about how some people can maybe deal with a type of shame, perhaps, of maybe feeling like they're not spiritual enough because they need to go through a counseling or something. These lies that I feel like the enemy may give people. Talk a little bit about that.
So I would say that the biggest difference, besides the fact that one is trained and one is not, of going to, say, your friend or your neighbor or, the lady sitting next to you on your pew, if you have something that's so heavy or even something that's just been on your mind for a long time and you want to process that and talk about that, if you have not yet found somebody that you can trust with that and that hasn't used that to abuse you, a counselor is a great option. And the reasons for that is because a counselor gives you a safe space, okay? Not only do we do an oath and have these ethical backgrounds, I myself abide by the American Counseling Association's ethics. So, I have these things that I'm bound by law to keep safe. So your secrets are literally safe with me. But not just that, is there's things that sometimes people need that neutrality, A lot of times, you tell your friend this is what's going on and they try and fix it. I'm not a fixer, people. I think that's a big misconception, is you go to a counselor and they give you advice, right? That sounds like that makes sense. The kind of counselor that gives you advice is a lawyer. I'm the kind of counselor that's going to sit with you through this really hard time that you're going through and hear what you've been going through and offer that empathy in that safe space, and there's healing in that. And, we kind of scheduled this last minute, and I have some scriptures that back this up, but when you share something with somebody, the burden lifts. It becomes less heavy. So if I'm trying to pick up this heavy box or this heavy thing, if I try and pick it up on my own, it's pretty heavy, and I'm weak. If Sergio helps me, it automatically becomes lighter and easier to carry, and it works similar with counseling. The only difference is that when you leave my room and leave our counseling relationship, those things we talked about stay with me, and they stay with you. They don't go to anybody else, and some people really need that. You don't have to have a deep, dark secret to go to counseling. So, some people need counseling because they're having marriage troubles. They're having trouble with their kids. These are everyday struggles we all have.
Everybody has them.
Yeah. And I think there's this big misconception is if I go to counseling, that means I don't have enough faith. I'm not praying enough. Maybe God's somehow disappointed in me, or maybe the enemy's working too hard against me and I need to have more faith. There's all these things we tell ourselves, these narratives, and many times they're just keeping us from that growth. Sometimes I think of, when God carries you into a place where it's not a place that you want to be, but there's a spot for a miracle to happen. And I think a lot of times people can get that kind of jump start to healing. I'm not saying that counseling it's not the counselor that heals you, at least not this counselor, but there is a process that I believe that God, through his scriptures, has explained to us that, when we share those burdens with people, healing can take place because there is science behind just sharing things and speaking them out loud, that healing can happen.
That is so powerful. When you were saying that, it kind of reminded me of that verse in James where it says, I think it's in James where it says, confess your faults to one another so that you may be healed. I'm guessing that kind of goes back.
That's what I was thinking of. And I was like, oh, which verse is that? But yes, it's important, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And because you gave the example, just by speaking something, getting it out of your system, it is as if you were trying to carry something, but when you get it out, it's like somebody comes and helps you. That's so powerful because as you mentioned, sometimes, like a lot of times, I feel like people, even myself at times in the past, I've found myself in places where I'm like, well, it's like I'm even doing anything like crazy bad, but it's like, maybe I can handle it on my own. Yeah. We get that like, I can do it all on my own, but in reality, as you're talking about, it is helpful and probably even like important to be able to speak to people.
Yeah.
And so, when people come to you, like they're talking to you, and they haven't found like people that they've been able to like to, I guess, share it with, because you even said something in the beginning when you said you haven't found a friend like that you trust yet, or somebody who hasn't used what you've told them against you.
Right.
Would you say that that's one reason why people do not like to open up, is they feel like they've maybe been betrayed or let down or
Oh, yeah.
stuff like that?
I've seen innumerable people that had to literally fight themselves to show up for their first counseling session ever. And it was the best experience, and also some of the hardest experiences, sitting with people that were in the same room as me, but I could tell they're not really there. Because in their mind, they're thinking, I can't believe I came here. You know, what am I doing here? But at the same time, there's a part of them that showed up, right? They're physically in the room, so something tells me that they have something that they want to get off their chest or that they want to talk about. But, you know, it's important to have people you can trust. And, you know, as a counselor, one of the things I work toward are what are some of the people in your life that you can trust? Like, if you had great news or bad news, who's the first person you're calling? My job is not to make you dependent on me. My job is to help you find those people that will help you through tough times that you can go to. But, yeah.
That's wow. And so would you say, like, everybody has somebody that they can go, or most?
That would be
most,
great.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like to study, I'm really just enamored by how childhood experiences shape us as adults and some of the mental and physical effects on our health. And there was a study done by Dr. Vincent Felitti called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And they took adults that were college educated, and they had them rate on this scale. And it was basically a yes or no. Either you did have this experience or you did not have this experience in your childhood. And they asked about 10 to 12 questions. I believe it was 10. And basically, on a scale of 1 to 10, they could rate how, you know, if you can put a number on it, how many adverse childhood experiences these people experienced that were significant enough to affect their health and things like that. And then they looked at their health as adults. And there was such a significant amount of data there that showed that people that had a higher level of adverse childhood experiences, it was almost like a dose-response relationship. So you think of it like this. The more gas I put in the car, the longer and further it'll go, right? So think of it like that. In this case, it's not a place you want to go, but it affects your health so much. We're talking cancer, heart disease, just these, basically the top killers in America physically is caused a lot by the things that we've gone through. Now, it's not entirely. But what they looked at, because, you know, some people, when they're growing up, they may have done some things like smoking and drinking, which also increases your risk. But it wasn't caused by some secondary factor. A lot of these people that were having strokes in their mid-30s to early 40s that had no other health risks, they didn't smoke, they didn't drink, they didn't do anything that would necessarily make their risk higher, had these horrible childhood experiences that literally changed their DNA. I could talk about that for hours.
That's very interesting. Go ahead, keep going.
But basically, that is the thing that's impacted me the most in my counseling journey, because I'll tell you, a lot of the people that come see me or have seen me, it's something that happened in their childhood. And I know that's so powerful, because what happens to you when you're developing and growing matters. And it doesn't just matter because it's a developmental stage.
Right.
If something happened in your childhood and you're an adult and you're still struggling with it, it might be time to see a counselor when you're ready. You have to be ready as well. But along with that ACEs study, there's just a lot of data out there that educated me. And when I see people a whole different way than I used to. Because now it's not just about their mental health anymore. There's physical things that can happen to them later in life. And that to me is powerful.
You know, that reminds me of, I think it was a book in psychology that I had read or had came across. I never read it. I read a little bit of it. It was called The Body Keeps Score, something like that. So is that dealing with like trauma that the body can literally hold, like the physical body, not just the mind, like the soul part, but the body of the human.
Right.
And now, so you're telling me that like you have people come in, or you've done research and seen how people will literally get physically affected later in life by a traumatic experience or something like that, something similar that happened in childhood.
Absolutely.
How is it then that the body or the soul, like how is that, what is that relationship between the two? That's something that maybe you experienced, you witnessed, was told you, I guess it could be a myriad of things, can affect you in a physical manner to the point of cancer. How is that, or how does that even come about happening?
Well, there's a lot of complex things behind it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that, every single bad thing that happens in your childhood is going to cause cancer.
Right.
You can look up the Adverse Childhood Experience score sheet online. It's available to the public. The CDC is the one that did the big major study with that, and there's still ongoing research. Kids are resilient. Children are resilient, and thank God that they're resilient. But not just because bad things happen doesn't mean that you're going to end up with cancer or stroke one day. Please understand that. There are very specific things that they're measuring. They're asking things like, did you see your mother get beat or physically assaulted as a child? Or things like just around, like very severe, very specific things. Did you ever, not know where your next meal was coming from? So it's very centered on very traumatic points.
So even the anxiousness of like maybe growing up in a family that didn't have the needs to wonder when was my next meal, something like that can have that long-term repercussion.
Absolutely.
Wow.
There's this thing called CUTS, and it's an acronym for chronic, unpredictable, traumatic stress. So all these little things that happen are like little bitty paper cuts, or the wound gets bigger and bigger, and there's actually some science, but behind all the doom and gloom, there's actually some science behind what can be done to prevent these long-term effects. Right. And what they have found, and I'm going to pull it up in my notes, because my notes app and the iPhone's got all this.
Yeah, come on now. I bet it does.
Absolutely. But basically, if a child that's been through these circumstances, there's hope that they won't have these long-term negative adverse physical, long-term health problems. If they can have one supportive adult in their life.
Wow.
One person that's a supportive adult. How vague is that, right?
Right.
But it's somebody that they can go to and feel safe with. The power of one person.
Just one person.
Can negate all the effects of the things going around with them. Wow. If you have a child that's living in a home with neglect and have a high ACE score at a young age, it could be that teacher at school. It could be a Sunday school teacher. It could be one person. One person is enough.
Wow.
To do something to prevent that.
That is powerful, because how many children, even here at our church could come from, backgrounds that maybe we're not all familiar with.
Right.
And like you said, that Sunday school teacher, that, like a youth pastor, a leader, a minister, the impact and the healing impact that they can even play in that child's life, that is so powerful. That is so powerful. I saw you have your statistics. I'm just letting you go. Yeah. But wow, and it's so interesting because, Moretta, that gets me to thinking, how many things could adults be dealing with? Maybe not even physical, and maybe let's not even say it's so awful, like something so terrible, but how many things could people be dealing with in the later years in life that they have no idea, stems back to their childhood, that they still deal with today in a way that's probably not obvious to them?
Sure.
Like tendencies or fears, talk a little bit about that, like exposing those things.
There's so many different things it can be. I would say some of the most common are like your self-esteem.
Wow.
I don't know if you've heard of like the attachment theory and like secure attachment versus avoidant attachment and things like that. But with that, the way you were raised and the caregivers, again, or whoever it was that took care of you, have a powerful impact on how you see the world. And going back to that one supportive adult, that's going back to an attachment. We have to have people in our life as a child that keep us safe and secure. It's really, if we think about it, in order to survive, we have to rely on somebody as a child. But if that person that we rely on is emotionally withdrawn, abusive, neglectful, that has a very negative impact on us. It can affect the way that we behave as an adult. So we may look at people differently. We may have a hard time trusting people. There's different stages a child goes through of trusting versus mistrust and all these different things and theories. But you may live your life feeling like everybody's against you, or that everybody looks at you differently, you don't fit in. A lot of those thoughts often I can usually, after listening to you talk about your parents or your childhood or significant things that happened in your childhood, I can relate them back to that and say that's probably where that started. So the things that happen to us, they really do matter. Because it can shape the way we see the world. The tragic part is that if you've ever seen somebody with a cracked iPhone or Android, if you're one of those people, like my mother and father, yeah, you're an Android. But they have a cracked phone screen and it's so messed up, and like the colors on the screen are weird, and you see it and like, how are you even using that? How can you see what's on the screen?
I know a few people.
Okay, so eventually they get used to it, right? They learn, they download the app with a little circle so they can actually turn their phone off. And they learn to adapt to that broken screen so that they can function. That's similar to how we do in our lives, is we look through this lens, and it says broken lens, and it becomes our new normal. And sometimes in the counseling room or even in your life, you can be exposed to something different that's not that broken state and think, wow, life can be like that. And it's powerful for people. And also sometimes it brings a lot of shame because they're like, wow, this has been my family experience, or this has been what I've dealt with for so long. And that's when a lot of times people will come to counseling because they're like, I don't know how to deal with my in-laws. They have this kind of family, and I have this kind of family. I came from this background, and I don't know how to have a healthy marriage or whatnot. And that takes some time and adjusting, but it can be done.
Following that analogy, it's because I guess what happens is on the phone, whatever's being projected through your screen, it filters through that cracked screen.
Right.
Like you're viewing what you see through the cracked screen. So in the same way, I guess like people's lives, the way they see the world and their experiences are filtered through that brokenness, right?
Right.
And until they can, I guess, acknowledge that or come to become aware, then they can't, I guess, do something about it or won't know to do something about it. Rather.
Right. And some people, I would say some people have some awareness. I don't want to speak for every person in the world. But what I will say is some people know and see that, but they're not ready to change. Sometimes people find a lot of comfort in what's familiar. Unfortunately, sometimes what's familiar and what you've known your whole life may not be serving you well.
Come on, that's good. That's good. Say it again. Unfortunately, what's
sometimes the things that are familiar to us and are comfortable because it's what we know, they may not serve us well. But, some people aren't ready to change that. It's scary.
So maybe there's somebody listening right now who, while they may not know exactly what's going on, they know something's going on, something's not right, either from within or without. How does one get ready? How does one make those steps to say, you know what, I need to go talk to somebody. I need to go and, see someone who can help me, I guess, look within or analyze what's going on in order to fix what's been happening?
I would say sometimes you have to do things scared. Yeah. And I'll be honest, as a counselor, I realize it's scary to go talk to anybody, a friend or a stranger. Yeah. Even if I am HIPAA compliant and not going to tell your secrets. But I think the main thing is when you're ready to just get curious about why am I the way that I am? Do I want something different for myself? Or do I just need a space so I can try and figure out what I want? Because you don't have to have all the answers to come to counseling. You just need to be curious and just willing to sit and think and reflect, and that's a great place to do it. So I won't say that you need to feel 100% ready because it's scary. But you have the autonomy as an adult. If you're a minor, your mom has to sign consent for me to see you. But as far as that goes, you can do what you want to do. And I would not put a stamp on what's ready or not ready. If you're willing to walk in the room, that is the most courageous thing people do. And I applaud that. When you get to that point, you've done the hardest part.
You said some people fight themselves to even get in the room.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I would probably even imagine not only get in the room, but even begin speaking, probably.
Absolutely. I've seen every kind of person I think I can see. And some people might talk your ear off and be ready. They're like, let's trauma dump everything right now. I'm ready. They got lists. I love a list. Let's go. Yeah. But and then some people are just trying to feel comfortable in the room, and that's okay too. I'm here for it all. But it's your journey. No one person is the same. So I can't say there's one right way or wrong way. If you show up, you did most of the work.
That's so awesome. That's so powerful. I want to go back to something that we were talking about a little bit ago, and it was about vocalizing things and speaking about them. You said there was a power to being able to just get things out, to just literally speak them. So what about when it comes to like let's say somebody is dealing with something, and sometimes, I feel like even in the church world, we kind of do this as well, where you kind of make like a declaration of yourself, where you're like, I will not live in fear. For example, I will not talk about like because that's something that's always fascinated me, because I know in churches that's something that we do. We declare even scriptures over ourselves, things like that. What is the psychological impact that speaking things? Because maybe somebody isn't ready necessarily right now to go and speak to somebody, go and open up, but they want to begin somewhere, with themselves. Take a step in doing that. Talk a little bit about how that could go about.
Oh my, your words are so powerful. Some of the research that I have listened to and read, they had these people, they've done countless, and I'm probably mixing them all together in a pretty little charcuterie board of different studies. But they did this study on what words can do to your DNA. So they put DNA in a little tube, right? And they had people go in the room and say really harsh words to one another, and it broke that DNA strand. And I might be butchering this, but this is my interpretation of this.
Come on.
Then they had people go in the room and say good, kind words to one another, and it mended it. There are literal things in your body that God created that can, and it's in the tongue, right? Power and death is in your tongue. Life and death. And that's so true, right? The scientists studied it, and they were like, we concur, we agree that is the case. Yeah. So there's so much power. Sometimes there's things that you need to know, and maybe you're not feeling the belief of that yet, but saying it is powerful. The more you say something, the more you'll believe it. There's a crazy study I read about.
Even if you don't believe it at first, right?
Exactly. You don't have to feel the feeling of that in order to say it. I can say anything and read it off a piece of paper and not feel it. And there's power in that, though. And that's something that I often tell clients is to say these things, thankfulness or coming up with 3 things a day you're thankful for. It helps shift that negative attitude into something more positive over time, because the things you speak are important. And a lot of times we're saying things in our head about ourselves, and it's not good.
Which is, and that's what I was curious about that. So I was like, so what if, maybe there's somebody out there, they are very negative towards themselves. And while they may not vocalize it, thinking it almost has the same effect, right? Or the same exact, because, although you're not saying it, you're still kind of speaking it to yourself from within.
Right. Our thoughts are powerful, right? So one of the things that I like as far as the way I operate as a counselor is I do a lot of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because our thoughts have a lot of impact on how we behave and how we act, right? So if we can change the way that, or the narrative we keep telling ourselves, it can often change the way we feel and the way, evidently, how we behave. So if I'm constantly thinking, I'm a failure, I'm no good, I'll never amount to anything, I'm going to start feeling pretty terrible about myself, and then I'm going to start behaving in a way that maybe isn't good. I might do some things like high-risk behavior, smoking and drinking and things like that. So, or anything really that could be harmful to you, whatever that may be. So there's things that we have to do to shield ourselves from ourselves, because oftentimes we're our own worst enemy.
And that's so true. That is so true. Sometimes we are, like you said, our biggest problem, our biggest adversary. Wow. And so powerful, so good. Like that just stirs up so many more questions. But to kind of begin wrapping it up, you were talking about the narrative of your mind has to change. It has to be positive. It reminds me of that verse that says, "Think on things which are lovely, which are gentle, pure." I think something like that. And so to kind of close and tie it back in all together, how does like counseling and like the knowledge that how can it function together with, like you mentioned earlier when we first started, like being apostolic, being a Christian? What are like practical things that like an apostolic person can do, with your knowledge of counseling and everything, that can help them lead that healthy mental lifestyle? Because if the mind is not good, the rest of, as a man thinks so he is what I'm reminded of. And so what are practical ways that tie us spiritually to a Christian that can help them just live that healthy lifestyle mentally?
So I do have a few scriptures prepared because this is a kind of a common thing. First of all, when we're thinking about ourselves, and I'm thinking about just the spiritual context in our walk with God, the scripture in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, and to give you an expected end." It helps me when I can't give myself the mercy I need to think about, what does God say about me? If you want something to help you get in the right mind frame, stop thinking about the thoughts that you have or the things people have told you, and start thinking, what does God say about me? And the other thing I'd like to think about,
that's so good,
is Romans 12:2, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." There's things in this world that's going to try and pull us from who God wants us to be. There is so much peace when we find that connection between what God says we are, and then we can start telling ourselves, I am loved, I'm a child of God, I am an heir to the throne. Like there's things like that you can tell yourself. But I know we're short for time, but I have so much more.
No, share a few more with us. We're all good here. This is good stuff, because it's like the Bible is like full of these affirmations based 100%. In the Spirit.
Oh my goodness, yes. Psalms 19:14, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer." The words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart, is it acceptable to God? That's a good way to check yourself, ain't it?
Yeah, it is. Wow. This is so good, Moretta. And I know you have like so many more notes and pages and pages. It's powerful tools, great practical ways to just be able to. I like what you said there on that first verse of Jeremiah 1, where if you're not looking at yourself correctly, then why don't you look at yourself through God's eyes?
Oh yeah.
Because like as you were mentioning, so many times we are our own worst enemy. And we can get in the way of a lot of things in our lives. And so sometimes we need, not sometimes, but I guess always, we need the perspective that God has towards us.
Right.
And we need to adopt that perspective, right?
Right. Like in 1 Peter 5:7, it says, "Casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you." There's your one supportive person. If you have nobody else in the world,
come on,
you've got a God that loves you.
Amen. You do need people, but if you don't have them, God's always there.
Yeah, and that's powerful to me, because I can live without anybody else, but if I don't have Jesus, what do I have?
Wow. That's so true. That's so good. Man, we've had such a great morning. If you guys have enjoyed this, why don't you drop Moretta a comment, give her a shout out. These conversations are conversations that I can sit here and just listen to for hours, because, again, I also have, I'm interested a lot in psychology. I told Moretta before we got on, I just love how the mind works. And I love being able to diagnose, things that are, details and specifics about, if people look at themselves this way, they struggle with this, if they have these thoughts, they deal with fear, with doubt, anxiety, worry, like what is it that causes that? I'm a very analytical person, so I love to, just sit here and just listen to all these theories. That's why I shut up. I let Moretta do the talking, but guys, we have had such a good time. Again, why don't y'all give a shout out to Moretta? Before we leave though, is there anything that you want to share? One more thing you want to give to the audience before we get off, before we say goodbye?
Just take care of your mental health. Know that you're not weak if you need to see a counselor. And if anything, that makes you the strongest person and so courageous to go and take that step if you're ready.
Yes. And as Sister Moretta said, she is a professional counselor. And so even with our conversation, I know that it would be such a blessing if you need a counselor. Sister Moretta is apostolic. She has a great spirit. And it's wonderful. I've had a wonderful time. I feel like as she was talking, I was like, okay, you need to self-analyze yourself.
I got a wait list though of 2 years. I got to get my hours in before I can see private practice. But in 2 years, hit me up. Hey.
Come on. In 2 years, she'll be ready for y'all. But thank you guys for joining us. Don't forget, we have prayer at 9:30. We have service at 10. We love you guys, and we hope you have a safe trip up to the church.